Welcome to the latest episode of the Navigating Disability podcast. I'm joined by my co-host, Jen Abbott. Welcome, Jen.
Good morning.
Today, we are thrilled to have Bob Buckley with us, a seasoned leader and passionate advocate for the autism awareness. With years of experience in management and leadership, Bob has worked across various industries, but it's his dedication to autism advocacy that truly sets him apart. He's committed to raising awareness, fostering inclusion, and driving positive change for the autism community. Listen as Bob shares his personal journey and the important work he does in autism advocacy. Let's dive in. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. You have a really interesting story, and I'd love you to start it with why we're here. How did you get involved with autism?
I got involved because my son was diagnosed with autism when he was probably 5 or 6 years old. There wasn't a clear point at which that sort of happened, really. Basically, there was this challenge of trying to get him the supports that he needed that wasn't working very well. So I sort of got involved in that, both because of our individual need, but because I react badly to systems that don't work. I think it sort of activated me, and when I first met the current CEO of the NDIA, she described me as a fierce advocate.
And we love that. Absolutely.
Yeah, it now seems to have been an insult, but I didn't realize that at the time. I took it as a compliment.
And still to this day, please do, because we need more of you in this community.
Yeah, well, that's one of the challenges. I'm old now. I turned 75 this year, and my cognitive function isn't what it was 10 years ago, and I'm not going to be able to keep this up much longer. And I'm really keen to see some people step in and take some of this stuff on, because I've been doing it now for quite a while. I've been convener or co-convener of Autism Asperger Advocacy Australia for over 20 years. And it's not a role I particularly want, actually. I'd be quite happy to hand it over to somebody else. I don't expect somebody to do the same jobs. Anybody who comes into this role will do it differently to me. It will be quite different. And that could very much be a very good thing. But for the time being, there are people that want me in this role, and that's the way it is.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your son?
My son's really, he's unique, as is the case for all autistic people. We say he's nonverbal, but he's also hyperlexic. So he's got thousands of words. He's got a huge vocabulary. My daughter, who's 2 years younger than my son, was doing a nursing and paramedicine degree, and in her final year, she invented a game for him, which was to see if he could pronounce medical terms better than she could, which turned out to be very much the case, and spell them. But when he comes home from his day program, I say, "What did you do today?" His standard answer is, "I had fun." And he can't actually tell us any more about his day than that. And it's not that he doesn't know, because if we question him intensely about who he saw, he can tell us who it was. So he knows the stuff, but he just seems to have no way of turning this stuff into language.
Yeah.
His ability, he can multiply 2 5-digit numbers in his head instantaneously.
Wow.
He knows his 1,000 times tables up to 1,000 by 1,000 unbelievably quickly. I don't think he actually knows them. I think he calculates them in his head, but we've got no way of knowing how he does that. So he's got some skills with numbers that are spectacular, but he doesn't understand what money is, right? So he was at the day program and they thought, oh, we need to teach all of these people with disability because it's not strictly autism, there's a whole bunch of other people, budgeting. And they went, well, there's no point in teaching Kieran because he can do all the sums just no problem at all. I mean, he doesn't even have to write them down, he can do the sums. But so he could do all the sums with the numbers, but he didn't understand that he needed to have money to go and buy himself a drink or, right? Which is pretty remarkable. So his skills are really all over the place. I mean, in terms of cognitive skills, he has no concept of disability. You know, if he wants to do something, he can go and do it, you know. But there are just concepts that he just doesn't get, and we haven't been able to get him. It's not as if he can't learn. An example of that is he was at a special school towards the later part of his education, and special school says, "Oh yes, we teach to these kids' strengths." They knew that he could multiply two 5-digit numbers, right? But he got to the age of 16 and they hadn't really explored anything other than exercising his arithmetic ability. And I thought, I wonder how long, whether he could understand square roots and how long it would take. I gave him three well-chosen examples and he understood square roots from then on. He can do square roots almost as fast as he can do multiplies from 3 examples, right? I didn't explain to him what square roots were. I just showed him these examples and then he generalized it across numbers. So you sort of look at that and go, there's really interesting things happening inside a brain like that, right? Doesn't understand what money means, doesn't understand that you can't just step out on a road without looking.
Okay? Yeah, it's a big thing. Yeah.
But in the kitchen, I can hand him a knife and ask him to chop up onions, and I have absolutely no risk to his safety whatsoever. So, you know, there's this range of things that he can do and things that he can't do. And it's really quite intriguing. But he's one of those kids that, you know, if I'm home alone with him, I can't go next door for a cup of sugar. It's not safe. So that's one of the ways of looking at do you have severe
How old is he, Bob?
He's 33 now.
33, okay.
34 this year.
So in terms of how, and you said he was 4 when he was diagnosed?
6, about 6.
6. How did that, and back then, 34 years ago, there obviously wasn't as much knowledge about autism that there is today. How did that affect, was it you and your partner? How did that affect or change your outlook on life?
Well, in a lot of ways. So my partner is a school teacher. She had a special interest in teaching reading and writing, but probably reading most. So language side of things. There was the thing that happened in my life that meant I suddenly was in charge of one of the top 10 consultancies for the Defence Force in Canberra through the 1990s. And my business partner suddenly died. And I couldn't find a replacement for him, so I actually shut the business down. I don't blame that on my son's autism, but it coincided pretty much with my son's autism. And I went, I can't be distracted by trying to run a business like that. So I just stopped the business and started working for other people, which is much less onerous and could focus more on my family. Um, my wife ended up being the teacher in my son's classroom for a significant amount of time while we had a 10-year court case about whether or not um, autistic children should have early intervention or their educational needs be met. And that 10-year court case, which was never going to deliver justice, I mean, a 10-year court case about early intervention or a child's education is never going to deliver justice, right? So I tend to refer to it as an injustice system because that's the sort of thing that happens all the time. But at the end of that, the conclusion was not providing an education or early intervention for an autistic child is not disability discrimination in Australia under Australian law. I might add that the chief magistrate who made that decision left under a cloud. He left quickly under a cloud because you can't go investigating chief magistrates because all their cases then come into question and everybody gets let out of jail. So the system is grossly broken. But that sort of that was my first major encounter with how the disability advocacy works and what governments do and what the political reality of all of this is. It was quite a lesson, I can tell you.
So that's a pretty big impact to have to close down your business. And I absolutely 100% understand why you made that decision. How does, looking back now, how does that make you feel?
I completely validated. I mean, it was absolutely the right decision. I mean, you know, I've had a pretty successful career. I went from there to being. I had pretty good jobs after that, right? I was a data analyst at the Australian Institute of Sport, and then I was headhunted to be a computational genomics specialist at John Curtin School of Medical Research at ANU. So I went from, I'd had a life of senior consultancy, but also an academic life. And I just went back into academic life and research and a less pressure job so that my family could take a higher precedent, really.
Well, that's very admirable. But as I said, I understand why you do it because we all do it for our children.
Yeah.
How do you?
I should say that was done for me, actually.
Well, it is, isn't it? There really isn't a choice.
Yeah, and my life was easier in that regard, you know.
Easier on one hand and then harder on the other.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. In terms of his education, Kieran's education, how did you look at that? So you've got this kid with a really amazing brain that is so good in some areas, but so I'm not going to say deficient's not the right word. Does he have an intellectual disability?
I don't think that concept fits, right? I mean, it depends on how you measure it, right? So if you did some standardized testing, there are places where he would show up as really poorly functioning, right? He can't live independently.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think you would say, yes, he has an intellectual disability. And I might add that people are down on IQ tests and things, but I actually think as a gross measure, they have a reasonably good place. If you use them, if you understand them and use them sensibly, they're probably a sensible thing to do. So yeah, I mean, he can't live independently and never will. He also has a major heart condition, so two bouts of open heart surgery by the time he was 3 years old. Okay, but that hasn't slowed him down either. Okay, he's he can swim and ride bikes, and he insists on going on a daily walk. So yeah, but you can't have a conversation with him about anything, right? Um, there's some interesting things about this. Kieran's living a life that he's enjoying, and for me, that's a massive success. For somebody like him to have a life that he enjoys, um, I feel very, very proud of that, and I've got to give a lot of credit for that to my wife. I'm sort of this loud voice here, and I provide some of the support, but she's really the driver of that part. But she's the manager of how that all works. So,
What supports have you had in the community and as Kieran was growing up?
so the first thing to say is that Kieran has had more ABA than any other child in Australia. Okay. And that happened because of that 10-year court case. The ACT Education Department said, "Oh, we'll put you into, we'll provide his ABA while the court case runs." And then the judge decided to keep that going for 10 years. Well, it wasn't fully 10 years, actually. It was about 3 years in when that started. There were two boys in that program, right? One of them was Jack Sullivan. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. That was an accident in care. And his mother was a remarkable lady. The Woodbury School is named after her in Sydney. So we had this support from the ACT Education Department where we had overseas experts coming and supervising their ABA program while the court case proceeded. And Kieran has, if you know ABA and you meet Kieran, you can see that, because he's one of the ones who didn't make the gains that are often described. So his gains give him a life that he's enjoying, but they haven't given him the functional skills that often come with those kind of programs. He has some skills, quite a lot of skills, enough that we would have already cost recovered that based on the funding for his NDIS. So his ABA has already saved the cost of it from the NDIS over his time in the NDIS. Yeah. I can say that with confidence. But it doesn't mean that he's got the skills to live independently. He's still profoundly autistic, but he's living a good life.
Sorry.
And it's very atypical. I guess this is the hard thing. This is not what people's normal experiences are at all. So.
Well, they say you've met one child with autism. Yeah. You've met one child. They're all different. How did growing up with Kieran affect your daughter?
Look, she's now a mum of two. She's living a separate life. She's in another house. She had a brother who was quite profoundly disabled, but it meant that probably she had fewer friends come home. She spent more of her time out of home than friends coming home. But I think as a family, we worked pretty hard on not letting it impact. It's going to impact her life.
Yeah.
But it meant that we've still got a pretty good life, I think, and doesn't have the responsibility for it with things. But she became a paramedic, and as a paramedic who understands autism at that level, she's probably very good at that.
Oh, she'd be an absolute asset in the industry, that's for sure. That's because it comes from a whole different perspective, which is wonderful. So can I just ask, there's so many people in the community, facing their own challenges, and just feel stuck or limited by the circumstance. Is there any advice that you could give them, from your personal experience on how they overcome it?
Uh, that's a really hard question, right? So, I mean, I know I was neurodivergent from a very early age, and my advice to people is probably not especially useful because very few people have a life like mine.
Yeah.
Very few people have a brain like mine. But mine is different,
Yeah.
which is sometimes good and sometimes bad. Um, but it's given me a very successful career, albeit a sort of backroom career, but quite a successful career. As has sort of been intimated by what I've said already. Um, it's really hard. I guess, what can I say? My advice to people is do the best you can and don't give yourself a hard time if it doesn't work out. You know, I come with unreasonable self-confidence. I'm a sort of incredibly self-confident person, and it gives me a lot of strength for dealing with all of this stuff and for dealing with systems. And I also live a life where I just don't have any regrets. I just go, I'm going to do something, and that's if it was the wrong decision, stiff cheese. If it wasn't,
Yeah.
and I can let that roll off me. That's an enormous luxury, right?
Absolutely it is. Because I know myself as a mum, as a parent, we go through so much guilt on have we made the right decision or have we done this or have we done that. But as long as our children are happy and they're healthy and they're supported, that's the main thing. And they have the unconditional love. So I think we do, as a society, go through life very hard on ourselves most of the time. So to have that resilience and that no regrets attitude, I'd love a piece of that. So if you can send that across to me, I'd be very much appreciated.
Well, that's the answer. That's my first answer to the question.
Yeah,
Is,
yeah, that's
is that's
brilliant.
my advice if you can, but
Yeah.
that's really hard to achieve, right?
Mm,
But
yeah,
but don't try not to give yourself a hard time about and don't look if you made a decision you go look that's the best I could do at the time.
yeah,
Don't give yourself a hard time about it and look forward at what you're going to do that's going to be better in the future. Just avoid thinking about I mean my wife says I forget the bad things anyway. I just delete them from my mind.
yeah.
And it's not a conscious thing, it's just the way I live, which is part of the luxury of who I am. Um, and it's easy for me to say that. And it's easy for me to say, yeah, go out and understand this stuff. I mean, I had a job in a research institution from the day I left school, right? So I have the luxury of being able to read research and understand that sort of stuff in a way that most people can't. Um, and I come with a natural skepticism about any of that sort of stuff. So I actually have a lot of defenses against the sort of bullshit the world throws at you. Um, getting advice from me on this is probably not that helpful because I'm really conscious that most people don't have that luxury.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not something that you can get easily. I wish it was.
So you don't think it's a mindset thing, Bob?
Well, it is a mindset, or maybe it's even more entrenched than a mindset. It's part of who you are. Um, but I think I don't know about how you train that. It's sort of entrenched in your personality, I think, and possibly in your genetics to some extent.
Yeah.
Um, so it's hard to do anything about it. But If there are ways, if you can do it, then do it. Maybe practice it, right? And that's one of those things where you need to practice it not when you're stressed and needing it, but you need to practice it at other times, right? When you're not stressed, you need to practice how am I positive? How am I looking forward? What am I going to do? So that you've got more chance of doing that when you are stressed, unhappy, and those sorts of things.
So a little bit of mindfulness, just taking it all in. And I guess the key point I got from that discussion was let's not be too hard on ourselves because we're all learning lessons and we're all, driving our story each day. So it's about being less critical of ourselves and just taking it as it comes.
Yeah, and looking at, there are opportunities. Everything is an opportunity.
Yep.
That's the other thing in life. We've had a national autism strategy released, which is a complete pile of poo. Um, it's an opportunity to do way, way, way better.
Yeah.
Right. So, and being able to say that it's a pile of poo and you need to do better is actually a possibility of moving that
Yeah.
forward. So yeah, I mean, there's a few little good things in it, but really, in terms of what was needed, it is so far behind. It is pathetic. But the opportunity is to say that and to try and use that to drive it forward.
Yeah.
And that's a lesson for the whole of life. Every setback is an opportunity to do better. And in fact, setbacks are the best places to do things better because it's a low bar to start with.
You never fail, you always learn a lesson
Absolutely.
as long as you can move forward.
Yep.
What are some misconceptions, Bob, about living with a disability that you wish more people understood?
Look, well, I guess people sort of think that you have to be successful to be successful.
Mm.
Um, I mean, living a happy life is a massive success. Some of the most successful people don't live particularly happy lives. They're successful because they're driven by their feelings of not success. Um, so that's one of the myths is sort of about being successful, about being normal or fitting in. I've never fitted into anything in my life, but I feel like I've had a pretty successful life. Um, um,
Does that then come back to a confidence in you?
yep. My self-confidence is just astounding. Um, and I've come to realize just how resilient it makes me, how it's driven me to have to feel good about my life, really.
And is that self-confidence, is that something that you've built, or do you think it's innately there?
I suspect it's innately there.
So you is it a feeling? Like if you've got to make a decision, do you base that decision on your feeling or are you more analytical?
Well, I am analytical, but not about that. I mean, I reflect on that sort of stuff, so I am increasingly analytical as I get old. Um, but no, it's not something I've built on. It's just there. Um, it's really hard to describe. I wish I could describe it. I mean, there are a number of things that in my life that I sort of look at how I react to the world and the way I do things and go, why can't I teach? So I spent a lot of my life teaching, and I'm frustrated that, not really frustrated, but it does frustrate me that I haven't been able to teach people some of those things. Like, I mean, I probably had the same sort of savant skill with computer programming as my son has with numbers, right? And for me, I taught computer science, and it was enormously frustrating to me that I was not able to instill that kind of stuff in my students. I could teach them to program, but I couldn't teach them to see programs the way that I did. That bring a program to me that they said, the whole class has tested this to make sure it's absolutely right. Is it? And I look at it and go, no, try this data, and they try it and it doesn't give the right answer. And they go, how did you do that? And I go, that's just the way I see computer programs. I guess for me, it's if you've seen The Good Doctor, he sort of visualizes sort of spatial stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have a brain that does that with computer programs. It really does that with computer programs. Now, I'm probably neurodivergent. I'm certainly not autistic, and I say that because I don't have any deficits. There's not really any place in my life where you would say I needed support, which is the actual definition of autism. It's not being neurodivergent. The definition of autism that we have is the one in the DSM-5 or the ICD-10 that says you need support in 2 areas. I have none of that, but I have a lot of the same brain features as my son. From what I can observe, I mean, we have no idea what they are, but the same sorts of things sort of happen. So, I'm pretty strongly neurodivergent, but and you sort of look at that and go, that's not something I'm ever going to be able to teach. So the other parts of my life about the self-confidence, I don't have to be arrogant about that. It's just who I am, and it's not something I particularly want to rub in or anything, but it's the luxury that I have. And I wish I could instill it in other people. But all I can do is say, look, this is how it works for me. And if you can achieve the same sort of thing in any way, then, you get to my age and feel I've had a pretty good run of it and feel good about how my life has gone.
Talking about Kieran and being 33 and living at home, and obviously, you're getting older at 75. Yep. What have you put in place for Kieran when there's a time when you're not around? What is the future that you see for Kieran, and how have you set that up so that he's not just left on his own?
So Kieran has a day program. So he's got a day program which the people, I think, like him, enjoy him. They enjoy who he is, his personality. And that means that it works for him. It's not as if he doesn't have some behavioural challenges, and we have to keep very hard on top of that. But making sure that those people understand. So a big concern is if we're not here, will they be able to maintain that without our monitoring it? And the answer is almost certainly no. So I worry about when we're not around, which is a while away. His heart condition may mean that he doesn't live as long as us, so it may be less of a worry than it might otherwise. We own our home, so and our expectation is that he will live in that home. He hasn't spent a night away from our house in over 10 years after an adverse incident in a camping trip. So he sleeps at home every night. He's quite a loner. He spends a lot of his time alone, but he has he had access to computers from a very early age, and he learned a lot of game playing skills. So he can amuse himself on a computer most of the time he's at home, if that's what he wants to do. Otherwise, he'll come out and eat. He half does personal hygiene. He demands, going out for a walk every so often. So he's able, not with language to ask for those things, but to
his behaviour.
Well, he does use some language in doing that. but he makes his preferences known quite clearly. He eats well, and he's comfortable with things like brushing his teeth, that sort of stuff.
So is that something that your daughter would get involved with to ensure that the supports were in place for him to?
Yes, I think that's the case. So she's recently moved back to Canberra. They were living away and had kids away, and they just moved back to Canberra. Um, um, so Kieran has a house that he will be living in, probably on his own, or maybe if we're gone. So I expect that he'll probably live with us. My wife is 10 years younger than I am. Doesn't mean that she's going to outlast me, though. You get old, health is not always as good as you'd like it to be.
Yeah.
So who knows what's going to happen in that regard. We don't know how long Kieran will last because he has a condition called tricuspid atresia, and operations for that. He was one of the relatively early people getting treatment, so we just don't know what the life expectancy is. But he's doing really, really, really well. His was one of the most successful operations that most of the cardiologists have seen. So that's really good. I expect that my daughter will maintain a very strong interest in what his life is like. I've been through this with, I have a cousin who has a 22q11 deletion. And when her parents died, she was living alone with support in their house while her brother was raising a family elsewhere. I was involved in the NDIS aspects of that because her brother, the reality of the NDIS is that a sibling like that either has to immerse themselves massively in it, and that's really difficult to do, or they need sort of really strong advocacy support to actually deal with the NDIS in those circumstances. Otherwise, you're going to get completely screwed over. Mm-hmm. So I was involved in seeing what's happened to her. She was in Canberra. She's now actually moved closer to her brother into a situation where. So I've seen how this stuff works at a pretty close level. And it's hard. Sometimes it works and sometimes it really doesn't. At the current state of the NDIS, I despair for people in those kind of circumstances, especially if you don't have really strong advocacy to support you.
So looking ahead, what are your hopes for the future for yourself and how society supports, people with a disability?
Well, as convener of Autism Asperger Advocacy Australia, my hope is that society will improve to such an extent that organisation is no longer needed. Mm-hmm. It won't happen, really, right? I mean, it's actually getting substantially worse. The government-funded advocacy programs basically pretend that severe and profound autism doesn't exist and are absolutely opposed to evidence-based practice in regards to that. They would much prefer completely dodgy and unregulated or barely regulated behaviour support practices rather than real clinical advice in that space. Yeah. And that's a really sad indictment of the whole system. And I'm not seeing any signs that that's going to change, but I think it may come to a head and may be coming to a head at the moment. We'll see. So there are massive problems around that whole behaviour space. We have a national autism strategy that doesn't even mention behaviour, which is absolutely inconceivable. So
The
I,
rumor on the street, Bob, is that they're trying to kick everyone off the NDIS who has autism. What's your thoughts around that?
look, I don't necessarily think they're trying to kick them off. The first thing I will say is we have a series of data from the ABS that says that most people with autism have severe and profound disability. They last year, in October last year, they released the data that said 73% of autistic people have severe and profound disability on a measure that doesn't even include behavior, right? Which is one of the key impairments of autism. So if you take the normal measures of disability and put an autistic person up against it, 73% have severe and profound disability. Not all the people with severe and profound disability are in the NDIS today. They haven't got in there, right? According to those data. But they believe that there's a whole bunch of young kids who don't really have autism and they don't deserve to be on there. The challenge here is that most of the world sees the high profile autism, the Josh Thomases, the Hannah Gadsby's, Grace Tame. I've got a lot of time for Grace. She's on the right side of this. The others are sort of, they have no experience of my son and people like him, right? They just have no idea what it's about. There's quite a few of them. And that's what the government thinks autism is, and it's not a real disability. But the data tells us that those are the exceptions, not the rule, right? But it's people like that that they put on the panels and get advice from. And that's the problem. They leave out people like my son because A, you can't talk to them, and B, they don't want to talk to people like me who might represent them. So that whole section is being whitewashed or ignored. It's swept under the carpet. But if you think and we recently had Minister Gallagher's daughter has sort of come out and sort of go, the things that you're describing, they're very serious and very real problems, right? I'm not suggesting for a moment that they're not major issues and they have massive effect on people's lives. But there are different parts of the spectrum that are quite different. And those ones are not, they're not representative, and they're not even the majority, and they're certainly not most of the support needs. Okay. Their issues are really, really serious and need to be addressed. Don't misunderstand that. And I'm one of the lucky ones who survives all of that beyond that, right? So I'm so far at the other end of the spectrum from my son, but still sort of in that spectrum, right? So I have this experience of those two ends. And believe me, my son is at the mild end of the severe part, okay? There are families who have much harder time than we have. Okay.
But that in itself, though, Bob, sorry, just let me stop you there. If you, and I agree with what you're saying, but if you look at if a normal family with neurotypical children look at you, they would go, oh my God, how does he do it? Like, Kieran is so profound and so disabled, and so they have absolutely no understanding of the day-to-day that you do for your son.
That's true. That's true. But the other thing I don't understand is that he's enjoying his life, right? And for me, he doesn't have to follow in my footsteps. It's far more important for me that he has a life that he enjoys. I mean, this advocacy stuff is a part of my life. There are other parts of my life where I'm probably equally famous. I'm a semi-professional musician and have been all my life as well, right? So I have a long musical career, and it makes me, up until they started paying me for this job, it was actually making me more money than the advocacy work. But that's been an enormous success for me as well. So in my academic career, the advocacy is just a new little blip that sort of occurred in my life, really. I have two children who, to all intents and purposes, are having really good lives. Neither of them are going to follow in my footsteps. Neither of them will be as academically successful as I was. Not that I'm a big academic success, actually, um, but they're having great lives and they're achieving great things. But that's easy for me to say because I'm living that life. When people look at it and look at normal measures and sort of say, is that a successful life? They probably don't see it that way, right? There are lots of people think I should be more famous. There are, but I have no interest in that really. There are they think that their kids should achieve more. Well, for me, having a good, happy life is one of the greatest achievements. It's not about being famous. It's not about making your mark on the world. So it comes down to what your standards and expectations are, really.
Yeah.
And this is your normal.
Yeah.
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 Just
And
like
I think
my normal is my normal.
yeah, and I think the most important thing is, and you've said, as long as our children are happy, supported, and loved unconditionally, the world's their oyster, regardless. Because as long as they have a strong foundation and the support that they require individually, they can do great things. And I think that's what we need to remember that, again, when we look at disability, Kate, it's not about disability, it's about ability. And
Yeah. Yeah.
everyone has their own individual ability, and we just need to nurture that, I guess, and just watch them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people should celebrate their abilities. I get
Yeah.
that's what I do. I don't dwell on any of the negatives very
Yeah.
much. The negatives I do dwell on is that the system should actually allow other people to celebrate their ability much more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bob, as we start to wind down, we're almost at at the hour mark. What
Oh,
are
I
your
feel like
hopes?
we've just started.
Oh, sorry.
Well,
Sorry.
it's as easy as that. It's just a beautiful conversation, getting to know each other.
We'll have
Oh,
to come back another day to finish. But what are your hopes for the future? Both for society, both for Kieran, both for yourself. Where do you, I mean, we know that the NDIS is absolutely disgraceful at the moment. We acknowledge that. What is the hopes for the future?
well, I hope my son continues to enjoy his life for as long as it goes, whether I'm in it or not. That's my first hope. The same for my daughter, for everybody, all of my friends, um, all of the people I advocate for. That's what I hope for.
Yeah.
In terms of more concrete things, whether or not autism stays in the NDIS, there needs to be a support system for people with severe and profound autism. I think the NDIS's big problem is that it's part of DSS. Okay, DSS gave us robo-debt, and that's symptomatic of the whole thinking around welfare. They believe that anybody who's on welfare is a welfare cheat, and that applies to people with disability as well. That kind of mindset is not going to get us anywhere. So the Disability Royal Commission's recommendation 5.6 is that we actually have a separate minister for disability and take it out of DSS, away from, I think DSS's mindset is broken anyway, but having disability in there is just completely dysfunctional. And I think there's economic arguments. The cost, the scale of the NDIS means it should have its own cabinet minister. It's unarguably the case, and that would be a really concrete step forward. Whether or not we have an NDIS and an autism thing, either could work, but certainly at the moment it doesn't. So, you need to think about all options. And we really need to get back to saying, if we're going to have a society that's really going to support people, some of us are going to have kids who are autistic, And that's probably for most people going to be a bigger burden than they can carry through their working life. So we need a society to support them. That means we all have to pay enough tax. There needs to be enough royalties on natural resources. Government needs to step up and stop this neoliberal bullshit about pretending that small government is good. We need a government that's the size to deliver the community, the society that we all want to live in. And that needs a bigger government than we have at the moment. Simple as that. So those are the sort of concrete things, really. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
It does.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Bob. It's greatly appreciated, your views, your personal experience, talking about Kieran. We really do appreciate it. We will have all your details for people to reach out if there's something that they want to ask you. And we will absolutely let you know when this is published. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me. Very much a pleasure. I enjoyed that.